Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Tuesday, March the 11th, 2025. Canada is about to get a new Prime Minister in the form of Mark Carney. The ruling Liberal Party has just had a vote. They've gone for him with an overwhelming majority, and sometime over the next few days he is going to be sworn in as Prime Minister. As I make this recording, I don't know when that is. Maybe by the time you look at this recording, we will know when he's going to be sworn in, which is a bit of a shame because I would have liked to have done the chart of Mark Carney's inauguration or his swearing in. And instead, I'm just going to have to be satisfied with his birth chart without a time and the time that he was elected. You know, I should say that Mark Carney is sort of standard fare. He was governor of the Bank of Canada, governor of the Bank of England. Before that, he worked for Goldman Sachs. He was or is a member of the foundation board of the World Economic Forum, and he's attended meetings of the Bilderberg Group. So, you know, you get the picture. Anyway, I will be looking at Mark Carney later in the video. But first of all, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Tuesday, March the 11th. So here is the picture of the planets for today. And I should just remind you, if you do happen to like the video, I'd be very grateful if you were indeed to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be very happy to have you as a subscriber. Of course, only subscribe if you enjoy this video. So here is the positions of the planets for today. You can see that the moon is in late Leo, set for noon New York time. New York is only 4 hours behind London, so at the moment the positions of the planets between sort of New York and Western Europe are really not going to be particularly different. And so the moon late Leo, the moon is void of course, certainly void of course in Europe and America, Africa. So what does that mean when I say that it's void of course? It means that the moon has made its last major aspect to a traditional planet before leaving the sign. And so, you know, with the moon being void of course, it may be for many of us just be a day where things just don't get themselves together. Things just don't happen. And that needn't be a bad thing. Sometimes it's good if there's no action. But yeah, today may be a bit blah, and you know, it's as if things are applying to nothing. Now there are some non-traditional planets. The moon is aspecting. Well, you could say there's Chiron. The moon does make a trine to Chiron, and it does make a square to Uranus. So moon trine Chiron. That is a good aspect, and that may allow us to be gently different. We do want to do things differently. We're not afraid to stand out in many cases. We may not be noticed because the moon is void, of course, but you know, we can in our own way make an impact, and perhaps we can make a fortunate impact. Maybe we can help someone out, and we may be able to go out of our way to help someone out. So that could be one manifestation of moon trine Chiron. Then moon squares Uranus. Moon square Uranus can sort of stir things up a little if we want, if we make a real effort. But the question is, how much are people going to respond? So with moon square Uranus, we might think we're doing something dramatic, but we'll get a reaction. But in practice, nothing much might happen at all. So we do have to just remember that the moon is void, and the moon doesn't move into Virgo until tomorrow. I think tomorrow, Wednesday, the moon moves into Virgo at 7:56 a.m., which is London time. So 7:56 a.m. London time is, what's that going to be? Is just before 1 o'clock in the morning at the moment, because America's put its clocks forward, but Europe hasn't. So that's just about 1 o'clock in the morning, California time. So it doesn't matter where you are, except perhaps in Hawaii or Alaska, the moon is not going to go into Virgo today. And aside from the lunar aspects, we do have a couple of aspects involving Venus. So Venus is semi-square Uranus. So Venus at 8 degrees Aries, making a semi-square to Uranus at 23 Taurus. So that Venus semi-square Uranus may say something about relationships. It might say something about aesthetic tastes or art or appearances, what people wear, for example. And it is a somewhat, I won't say difficult aspect, but it can be a little bit unstable. Yeah, we might find that our relations with other people don't go entirely smoothly. You know, things might just happen. People might respond in an unexpected way, unusual way, or it might be us responding in an unusual way. And many people are going to value their independence, with Venus making a semi-square to Uranus, moon making a square to Uranus. So respect other people's independence, and in the same way, other people will hopefully respect your independence. And do think about appearances. Appearances can matter, and it might be relatively easy to give the appearance of being somewhat unusual. Is that a good thing? I suppose it depends. Another aspect we have is Mercury conjunct Venus. This was an aspect I was talking about quite a lot yesterday. And Mercury conjunct Venus is an aspect that is exact today. I was maybe considering having Mercury conjunct Venus as my sort of headline topic for this video. But I saw the news about Mark Carney, so I thought I'd go for Mark Carney instead of talking about Mercury conjunct Venus. But maybe tomorrow, Wednesday, I will look in detail at this Mercury conjunct Venus. This conjunction between Mercury and Venus is, by and large, pretty fortunate. In a general sense, Mercury and Venus is about talent. It's about presenting who we are, presenting our skills. And you think about it. Mercury is a communication planet. Venus is the planet of relationships. You bring them together, and we can communicate very well. And it can be about art, this Mercury conjunct Venus. So that underlines what I was saying with Venus semi-square Uranus. Unusual art, what things look like. But we can present our talents to the world. They might not like what we're presenting, but we've got a good chance of making a good impression with Mercury conjunct Venus. So if there's something to be said, maybe now is a good time to say it, but we shouldn't forget that the moon is void of course. And of course, when the moon is void, it's just maybe that despite our best efforts, things just don't happen. It just feels that we're applying to nothing. But in my interpretations of Mercury conjunct Venus and the moon being void, they will depend on your sign. And sort of in a few minutes, I'll be going through the 12 signs. So that is the picture noon, New York. Here is the picture noon in Sydney, Australia. So the moon is much earlier in the sign. The moon is at 13:52 Leo. So that means that the moon is not necessarily void of course, because the moon is still applying to a sextile of Jupiter. So that sextile will be exact sort of late morning. So the moon is not entirely void in Australia and New Zealand. So if you've got anything important to do in Australasia, then I would suggest that you do it as early as possible, while the moon is still making that sextile to Jupiter. If you leave it till noon after lunch, you might well have missed your chance. And then there is the heliocentric view, looking at today from a perspective of the sun center of the solar system, and Mercury is in Leo, making an opposition to Pluto. So with this Mercury opposition Pluto, it's not an unusual aspect because Mercury goes so fast, taking 88 degrees to go around the sun. And with this Mercury opposition Pluto, we are trying to make an impression. We're trying to get noticed, and we're wondering, what do we have to say to get noticed? And there is always a way, and there's a possibility that through our choice of words we can be somewhat manipulative, and also we're aware of other people's manipulations, of people trying to control the communication channels, and that is happening all the time. And with this Mercury opposition Pluto, it may be more intense than usual. We see this we see this all the time, don't we? I noticed but over the last couple of days, was it over the weekend, there was this thing, how the Russians are fighting back against the Ukrainians in Kursk, this part of sort of Western Russia that the Ukrainians have occupied, and the Russians did this really daring thing. They got behind enemy lines by sending people through a disused pipeline and getting behind the Ukrainians and causing complete chaos. And clearly, it was a major Russian success, objectively. But of course, some people who probably get their news from the Ukrainians were saying, "Oh no, that the Ukrainians were ambushed, the Russians were ambushed, and it was a big disaster. Nice try." And that is an example of how the news gets manipulated. And with the war in Ukraine, we don't really know what's going on. And clearly, what actually happened was it was a major Russian coup, but someone was trying to manipulate the news and trying to show, no, it didn't work out like that. And that's maybe the kind of thing we might expect with Mercury opposition Pluto. And aside from that, we've got the Earth moving towards an opposition of Saturn, and that just tells us what we already knew from the geocentric chart. The Sun is moving to a conjunction of Saturn, because Earth opposition Saturn is the same as Sun conjunct Saturn. And tomorrow, the Earth opposition Saturn is exact, in the same way that the Sun conjunct Saturn is exact. So this T-square is still very much around. That T-square with Earth opposition Saturn with Jupiter on the T is very much with us, and I do think that this is about the economy. And I looked at the markets today. I mean, I'm recording this on Monday morning. I mean, I know it's a video for Tuesday, but I did record it on Monday morning. I noticed everything was red, and perhaps this is a reflection of what's going on. With the Earth moving towards square of Saturn, square of Jupiter, opposition of Saturn, the markets are very nervous. The Jupiter-Saturn square is about business. It's about the economy. And yeah, because they're in square, things are not necessarily working well, or there is this great tension, the tension between expansion and retraction, and it's going one way and the other way. I notice in Germany that the new chancellor has said he wants to massively increase borrowing, a lot of it to pay for defense, because Germany seems to want to sort of relive its old glories, and that might be one reason, I don't know. And so that would be an example of expansion. That would be Jupiter going crazy, but it's always up against Saturn. And so we do have this T-square, and I would have said that primarily this T-square is going to have an economic impact, but on a personal level, I think many of us might be concerned about the economy and whether there's going to be a recession and how this is going to be impacting us. And those are the main features of the heliocentric chart, and what I want to do now is look at things from the perspective of the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Tuesday, March the 11th, 2025. Aries. Aries, you continue to feel fairly creative, and you feel you want to make things happen, and you're trying your best to get noticed, and also to do stuff which is useful and which is a fundamental reflection of who you are. And you can certainly cover a fair amount of ground, but maybe you shouldn't expect wonders. The moon is moving through late Leo, so the main action has already happened. And so, don't be surprised if some of your efforts aren't entirely successful, or at least don't get the kind of recognition you were expecting. Though if you're comfortable with small results, that's okay, but just don't expect people to give you everything you're looking for. And if you feel you're not getting enough recognition, don't panic. Don't feel that this is a personal slight. It's just that other people are a bit distracted. They've got other things on their mind. And, because of that, Aries, it might be best if you just concentrate on yourself and be looking for small victories, and also, find ways to use your many abilities, but in such a fashion that other people aren't necessarily involved. And in some respects, Aries, it might be a time to be wrapping a few things up. You can now see what you can do, and that in itself should provide its own satisfaction. And when the moon moves into Virgo, which will be tomorrow, Wednesday, when the moon moves into Virgo, you may have a chance to revisit what you're doing now, and perhaps what you've been doing yesterday as well, but in a new way, in a more systematic kind of way, making sure that the things that you have been excited about can become permanent, can become a real and lasting part of the scenery. Now, as far as other people are concerned, in one sense, they may not respond to you in quite the way you would like. They don't seem to be able to reciprocate the full force of your enthusiasm. But at the same time, Mercury is making a conjunction to Venus. That conjunction between Mercury and Venus is in Aries, which is in your sign. And so it does seem that there are certain people who have got something to say, and they might even have a message to deliver. They might not be able to fully listen to you, or at least not fully appreciate what you're doing, but that doesn't mean you can't listen to them. And if you are prepared to listen to what someone says, and you're prepared to understand what makes a person special, again, even if they can't see what makes you special, it might sound a bit unfair, but still, it is worth your effort. And by listening to what someone says, and by really trying to understand another person's cleverness, then in a certain sense you can actually benefit. So be open to other people, even if you aren't fully in the mood. Taurus, Venus is your ruler, and Venus is the recipient of two quite important aspects. On one hand, we've got Venus semi-square Uranus, and on the other hand, we've got Mercury conjunct Venus. And because of these two aspects, I would have said that today you are an interesting person. You have got a lot to offer, and your perspective is somewhat unusual. And at the same time, you're not in the mood for necessarily sharing it. You know you're different, and when I say different, I mean different in a fortunate way. You know you're different, and therefore you might have to go your own way. And it's not a time for conforming. There might be a little bit of pressure to conform, but I would say just ignore it and just do things your own way. And you certainly don't need to feel that you're getting any. You don't need to feel that you need to get attention. I mean, you could get attention if you wanted, but the more attention you get, the more you're in the public eye, the less of an individual you are. So social contact could arguably diminish you. I mean, it's not going to be a terrible thing being in contact with other people, but somehow you're going to be more effective when you're either on your own or in a situation where you're surrounded by people and things who you really trust, who are completely on your wavelength. So if you want to be an individual, you need to really set up the environment right, and it has to be on your terms. And that in a way is very straightforward. And also you've got something to communicate, and it may be that if you've got something to communicate, you should hold off on actually revealing it. I mean, you could write something down, or you could record something, but does the public need to know about it right now? Probably not. It may be that the public doesn't need to know about it for weeks, even months. It's a time to keep it to yourself. You've got the ideas, and your ideas are great, but the world in which you're working in isn't ready for them. So that's a good reason to keep it to yourself, or to share your ideas and your thoughts with people who you trust. It's not a time to be taking risks, at least in a social sense. But you know that there's work to be done, and that work, might be taking place behind closed doors, but you have a sense that however good things are, however effective you are, things could always be better. And so you're quite a harsh taskmaster in terms of yourself, and you have high standards for yourself. And if you want to hit these high standards, then it's important that you have the right environment. And yes, if you're somewhere you're not familiar with, you're unlikely to hit these standards. You could disappoint yourself. So the more time you have in your own world, following your own rules, the better it is. And at the same time, Taurus, you could actually be more artistic than usual, because Mercury is conjunct Venus. We all have artistic talents, but Mercury and Venus is a particularly artistic pairing. Whatever that art is, whether it's writing, painting, sculpting, decorating, whatever it is, you do have a real talent here which really wants to come out into the open. But open up to a point. It's not a time to be revealing yourself to the wider world. And also your imagination at the moment is going to be on great form. So you can conjure up all sorts of things, and that's another reason maybe why you need space. Because if you're out there in the world, then what scope is there for your imagination to really work? You're going to be overwhelmed by external signals, external distractions, and your imagination won't get a chance. But if you're able to sort of retreat a little, then your imagination can really move into top gear, and you can just create some wonderful things in your head. And then with this Mercury conjunct Venus, you actually have a chance to make it happen and to actually create in whatever way is best for you. Gemini, the big aspect today is a conjunction between Mercury and Venus. And this Mercury-Venus conjunction makes you very effective. I think from a social perspective, you'll have few difficulties getting on with people, and you'll know what to say. You'll know how to say it, and there will be something about you that is really quite sort of charismatic. People are going to be interested in you, and the power of a spoken word is going to be strong. So if you've got something to communicate, then don't hold back. I mean, you should have been telling people about yourself and your ideas over the last couple of days, and it may be the case if you don't get your message out today, it might be too late. So there might be a little bit of a hurry here, and other people might not be quite as enthusiastic as they were yesterday, but I think you do have a chance here to get your message across and to explain to people who you are and what you can do. And it's important that you are confident but not arrogant, and you have to almost get that balance right. You kind of want to be confident until the very moment you start to become arrogant, but you need to know where to draw that line, because obviously if you're arrogant, that's not going to work. That's not going to help. People are not going to appreciate that. So you need to step back from absolute arrogance. But still, there's nothing wrong with having a high opinion of yourself, especially today. With that Mercury conjunct Venus, your social skills are extremely good, and you can talk about just about anything in that Gemini way. And maybe you can even engage in some small talk. I mean, I know I'm a Gemini. I'm not very good at small talk. I can't do small talk, but maybe you can. If there is a way to conduct small talk, then Mercury conjunct Venus, then you might have a chance. So you might think it's sort of trivial and pointless to talk about nothing in particular, but what's happening is that you're creating links. You're telling people you're telling people that you exist. You're sharing your ideas. You're also getting other people's confidence, and so any opportunity to communicate, even if you're talking about garbage, should be embraced. And in the process, you can be a little bit outrageous. I mean, not too outrageous, but the moon is making a trine to Charon. Now, moon trine Charon, it's a minor aspect. Well, a trine is not in itself a minor aspect, but it's an aspect to a minor planet. So not all of us are going to feel that moon trine Charon, but with a moon making a trine to Charon, moon making a square to Uranus, you can say things which get people's attention. And it may be worth saying something ever so slightly controversial just to get someone's attention. Perhaps you need to point something out to them. Maybe there's something going on in the world which isn't right and other people need to know about it. And so you can say something controversial, you get someone's attention, and once you've got someone's attention, you then have to perhaps mellow out a bit, to sort of calm things down and be reassuring. And you can certainly be reassuring today. And so Gemini, really try to interact. I think it's not a day when you should be alone in your own world. I mean, you can value your independence, but also consider what you actually have got to offer other people and society in general. Cancer. The moon continues moving through Leo, and it's moving through sort of late Leo, and the moon has made its last aspect to a traditional planet, or let's put that another way, it's made its last major aspect to a traditional planet. That means the moon is void of course, unless you're in Australia or New Zealand. So if you're a Cancerian in Australia or New Zealand or Kamchatka and Vladivostok, it's a little bit different in that case. So if you are in Australasia, then the moon doesn't go void until around, I don't know, late morning, noon. So if you're in Australasia, then try to do your important work early this morning, while the moon is making a sextile to Jupiter, because Jupiter is a traditional planet. So moon sextile Jupiter is, that means that the moon is applying to a fortunate aspect. You can make things happen. You can really make an impression, and you can do something that works out very well. But if you leave it too long, you move into, towards lunchtime, it's over. The moon is done. The moon has made its sextile to Jupiter, and it's void. And of course, if you're not in Australia, New Zealand, or East Asia, then the moon is going to be void all day. And what that means, Cancer, is you might have ideas about what you might like to achieve right now, but with the moon void, you might actually not be able to accomplish them. I mean, you might make some progress, but it just might feel that things are applying to nothing. And that means that you accept that short term you've missed an opportunity, if you haven't already taken advantage of that opportunity. That's one way of looking at it. Or you might actually feel a certain sense of relief with the moon being void of course. So in astrology, people talk about the moon being void of course, and they say, well, it's a difficult position for the moon to be in, but it's not always a bad thing. So, I do horary astrology from time to time. So people ask me questions, and I set up a chart for the exact moment that they're asked the question. And if someone is asking me a question which is very, very positively charged, will this project work out? Will this relationship work out? Will I make money? And if the moon is void of course, well, of course, the answer is no. So that's a problem with the moon void of course. But what if someone asks a question which is negatively charged? I mean, a long time ago, I was asked a question. Someone, was in the 90s. Someone asked me if they were HIV positive, and from what they said, they had a good reason to think that they might be. And I asked the question, and the moon was void of course, so I said no, because the moon is void of course. It's going nowhere. So if the moon is void, well, the answer is no. So if it's a negatively charged question, it's good for the moon to be void of course. And so if there is something that you are concerned about today, and you don't want to get involved in it, and you might feel that maybe you should get involved, but with the moon being void, you don't have to worry about it. And it does mean that there's less pressure on you, arguably less pressure on you than before. And it's not like there are great opportunities that you have to force yourself to take advantage of, or people that you should be listening to. So if someone comes up with a big idea today, or tries to pressurize you into doing something, with the moon being void of course, you can happily say no, you can't be bothered. Okay, you can use different words than that, and it's very unlikely that you'll be missing out on anything. So the moon being void of course for you, Cancer, could actually work in your favor. And it may also be that if you've got a passing concern, maybe it's a concern about money, it might be that actually it's just nothing to worry about. Now, there are some other things going on. There is a conjunction between Mercury and Venus, and this conjunction between Mercury and Venus is in Aries, and it's in a part of your chart which is really connected with success and status and achievement, and also just the whole way you come across. And with this Mercury-Venus conjunction, I do think that you can come over in quite a powerful way, and you can come over as someone who is intelligent and is imaginative, and as someone who really has got something to offer. And so if you are working today, you might not be able to achieve much because the moon is void of course. But because of that Mercury-Venus conjunction, you can just come over as being someone who is clever and who is creative, and whatever creative abilities you have, you can really show them off. It will be obvious. Now, you might not get a chance to actually use these abilities or to use this potential, at least not today, but it's still going to be obvious to everyone that it's there. So Cancer, just because you don't achieve anything concrete today doesn't mean that it can't be a successful day, because it's a day when you can really establish yourself as someone who is creative, as someone who is maybe even essential. If you're not there, what would life be like? Would anything be able to be done? Probably not. So don't hide your light under a bushel. Leo. Leo, Moon is still moving through your sign, that's true, but the main activity is over. The Moon yesterday made trines to Mercury and Venus, but that's in the past. Moon is kind of sextile Jupiter if you're in Australia or New Zealand, so that's true. So there might be some stuff you can accomplish early in the day when the Moon is making that sextile to Venus, if you happen to be in Australia or New Zealand or Far East Asia or Kamchatka. But by and large, we're coming to the end of something. The Moon is moving into late Leo, and Moon in late Leo, the Moon is void. And so it just may be, Leo, that you feel that the main work is already done and that there's not much point in doing anything else. Now, the Moon does make a Moon does make a square to Uranus. Now, Uranus is a non-traditional planet. It's a discovered planet. So in terms of evaluating whether the Moon is void of course, we don't count Uranus. At least I don't count Uranus. But that moon square Uranus might indicate that today there could be a little bit of excitement. Perhaps at work could be, if you're working, but you don't have to be working to experience that moon square Uranus. It might just happen, something in the outside world, and this thing which gets your excitement, it might be disturbing. It's not necessarily a good thing, this moon square Uranus, but whatever it is, it seems dramatic. But maybe it's not dramatic, because, as I've just said, the Moon is void of course. So don't throw a lot of your energy into something just because it seems to be of pressing importance. It may not be as important as it seems. And if you come across excited people who want you, who almost sort of demand that you pay attention to them because it's an emergency situation or something like that, maybe it's not quite the emergency it seems to be. So avoid exaggeration and hyperbole today, because it might be just much ado about nothing. Though there is a conjunction between Mercury and Venus in Aries, and this Mercury-Venus conjunction is pleasant, and it needn't be overly dramatic, and it could instead be about you being able to tune into whatever you're good at and also become better at something, or at least realize that you could become better at something. And that is certainly possible. And that does mean that it's a good idea, Leo, if you can be as just open-minded as possible, that there just may be a different way of seeing things. And it's therefore important that you're not focused on just one thing, one idea. You might think you've sorted everything out, that you've got all the answers, but you haven't got all the answers. And you should be appreciative of new possibilities, and you should also be appreciative of what other people have to offer. And if you see someone doing something that seems unusual, outlandish, you don't understand it, doesn't mean you should reject it, because knowledge is important, and any opportunity to expand your knowledge and to learn something new should really be welcomed. And look at your skill set, what you're good at, and it's great, but it could be better. You could always learn from someone else, and so don't be closed-minded today. That really does matter. And going back to what I said about not exaggerating, because there could be a little bit of a shock and people trying to get you to take something seriously which isn't really worth taking seriously at all. One could recast that and say, well, something might happen which doesn't require you to drop everything today, but it still gives you pause for thought and makes you realize that there could be another way of doing things, another way of perceiving the world. And that might be the best way of using any shocks that happen over the course of the day. As I said, I don't think any shocks that happen today are going to really affect you. They're not going to be as dramatic as they seem, but they still could be useful in terms of actually informing you and giving you a good idea about what is actually possible. Though, do be a little careful how you go today. I mean, if we take an accident index. I mean, I could give every sign an accident index and say, well, what is the probability of having an accident? Well, the probability of you having an accident today is very, very small, but it's all relative. And so in terms of the accident index, I would probably say that today might be higher than usual. And so, don't do anything dramatic. Don't do anything you haven't done before, at least on a physical level. So you just might be a bit vulnerable to sort of making a mistake or breaking something, tripping up. But it is relative. I'm sure nothing bad will happen, but I do have a duty just to suggest that maybe your accident index is perhaps a little higher than usual, but I wouldn't worry about it too much. Virgo, the big aspect is a conjunction between Mercury and Venus. Today, this aspect is exact, and Mercury-Venus conjunctions are very useful, and they're also very creative. They give you a sense of what you can do, and they're asking you to make the most of your full potential. And Virgos can be as creative and artistic as anyone, and they know that if you have a talent, you have a skill, you have to practice very often, you have to work on it, but at the same time, you don't want to be too harsh on yourself. You might think that you're good at something, but you also think, oh, well, you're a little bit out of practice. Maybe you're a lot out of practice, so maybe it's just not worth the effort. Maybe you should be worrying about something else, and is it really that special? But it is that special because of this exact Mercury-Venus conjunction, and you have something hidden which is important. No one can quite do it like you, and you do have a particular perspective, and you feel probably that if you were to wheel your core abilities out, then you might not know what happened. You might not know what might happen, and you might be somewhat concerned about getting criticism, and you might be asking yourself, whether you're good enough. But you shouldn't have these kind of questions. There is something evident. It should be evident to you that you're really good at it, And in some ways, you've been getting better at it over the last few weeks, even if you haven't been practicing it, because you've been aware of it. It's been brewing. Maybe it's been brewing in an almost unconscious kind of way. And so, now might be the time to start thinking about getting something out into the open. Not necessarily today, but look around you, think about where you are needed and where your abilities are needed. Also, this Mercury conjunct Venus is related to other people and how you relate to them. And in company, you can be quite intense in the fortunate sense of that word. You can hear people out, and you can get insights into what people are like on an emotional level. It's just clear to you if you think about it, and you can just go deeply into other people's personalities, and you'll just know how to behave. So your ability to deal with close relationships, even difficult relationships, is actually pretty good, because you can stay with it, and you're not going to be fazed by heavy emotion. It's just there. You just understand it. And so this does allow you to actually be incredibly perceptive. And in certain cases, people can benefit from this, maybe helped by the fact that the moon is making a trine to Chiron. That moon trine Chiron is quite a healing aspect. And so it may be relatively easy for you to use your perceptiveness and subtlety to understand someone and maybe to make things better for them. But the moon is in Leo today, and the moon doesn't actually go into Virgo until tomorrow. It doesn't matter where you are. I think maybe if you're in Hawaii or Alaska, perhaps the moon might go into Virgo very, very late in the day, but for the vast majority of the population, the moon does not go into Virgo today, but it does go into Virgo tomorrow. And it just may be that when the moon moves into Virgo, things will change, and maybe you can start to be more of an extrovert, and you can find more opportunities for showing the world who you are and what you can do. And also, before the moon moves into Virgo, while the moon moves into Leo, it is a time for subtlety, but you know that. And, with a subtle approach, you can really start to understand things, understand people, and in certain cases, you can be quite healing, and you can make people feel happier and more supported. Libra, Venus is your ruler, and today Venus is making a couple of quite important aspects. Venus is making a semi-square to Uranus. It's also making a conjunction to Venus, and that conjunction to Venus is really very fortunate. It's an aspect that you have been feeling for the last couple of days as it's been getting closer and closer. And now with Mercury conjunct Venus, you're able to give a good account of yourself, and you can speak quite freely, and you'll know what to say. People will understand you, and you will be able to kind of understand what people are thinking. So it's not just about what you're thinking, it's about what other people are thinking. And you have an opportunity to really get to grips with certain interpersonal issues. And it is about comprehension. And It's about understanding what other people are like what they're really like. It's also about getting other people to understand who you are and what you've got to contribute. Sometimes you may keep quiet about your possible contribution, but now is not a time for being quiet about it. You don't have to explain everything. You can actually be an example. You do what you're good at, and people recognize what you're doing. Though the Venus is making a semi-square to Uranus, and Uranus is the planet of surprises, and with the Venus semi-square Uranus, there is a possibility that you might do something or maybe say something which catches someone unaware, or catches people in general unaware. They didn't expect that of you, and there may be a sense of surprise. In certain cases, it might be a sense of dismay. You tell someone the truth of the matter. You reveal some aspect of yourself that maybe someone didn't want to hear, but they did have to hear. And that's Venus semi-square Uranus. Venus semi-square Uranus means you have to not be afraid of yourself as an individual, and the sooner you can express your individuality, the better. Because if you keep your individuality to yourself and you don't discuss your particular unique view, then other people are going to make assumptions about you. They might assume that you're not someone who's going to rock the boat. They're going to assume that you're going to follow a particular script, and in the end that's going to be reflected in the kind of pressures and expectations they put on you. It's not a time to be matching expectations for the sake of it, because if people have expectations, that can actually be a denial of your individuality. And Venus semi-square Uranus does really want to be recognized, and you can indeed be recognized, and you can do it in a way that is fairly organic at the moment. You can, as gently as possible, explain to people who you are and what your viewpoint is, and in the same way you're listening to other people, you're understanding their viewpoint, and there is actually the possibility of something quite harmonious to happen, harmonious where people accept each other and they're not too badly shocked. It's always good to have a few surprises. I mean, we need surprises, don't we? But you don't want to have surprises which are devastating, where people realize that, or think that you're one person and then you turn out to be someone else. But that shouldn't happen. It's a time for harmonization, where the person you are harmonizes with the rest of the world. Now, because of all this, from a relationship perspective, I think today can work quite well. So if you want to get on with people, have new relationships, well, I don't want to promise new relationships, but you certainly know how to get closer to people. That's going to be quite easy, and you'll also know how to get people's attention, and that's important. And I think that Venus semi-square Uranus is going to allow you to get people's attention, and then once you've got people's attention, you can work out the best way of handling the situation. Scorpio, you continue to be quite ambitious today. There are things you want to do. You want to make an impression, but you have to ask yourself, how far can you go? It may be that the main work has been done, and if you're desperate for further results today, you might be disappointed, and that is because the moon is void of course. It's made its final major aspect to a traditional planet before leaving the sign. Though it is slightly different if you're in Australia or New Zealand. If you are a Scorpio in Australasia, then this morning the moon will be making a sextile to Jupiter. So if you've got anything really important to do, you're desperate to make an impression, you feel, I don't know, a deal needs to be sealed, whatever it is, and you are in Australia or New Zealand, then try to put your focus on this morning, because by lunchtime it just might be too late. The opportunity might have gone. So overall, Scorpio, regardless of where you are, the day might feel as if, as it progresses, it does start to slow down, and you may just feel that your main work is already done. Now, that needn't be such a bad thing, because there's less pressure. If you know that there's nothing concrete that can be done, that can be achieved, then you can relax, and you can just get a sense of perspective on what has happened in the past. Though there could be still a couple of irritations. The moon makes a square to Uranus. Now that moon square Uranus comes over as being dramatic, but Uranus is a discovered planet. It was discovered at the end of the 18th century. So when one is making a calculation about whether or not the moon is void of course, you don't count the moon square Uranus. I mean, moon square Uranus is, you could say, the last aspect the moon makes before leaving the sign, but in terms of evaluating the moon being void, that moon square Uranus doesn't count. But still, with that moon square Uranus, there might be a feeling of excitement and drama, and something might seem to require your attention. It might come from someone else. Someone else behaves in a way that you weren't expecting, or presents you with something you weren't expecting, and your natural inclination is to escalate and to give this person a lot of your time. But it's important not to exaggerate. This moon square Uranus just might be a lot of fuss about nothing. So if people say things to you today which are dramatic, don't jump to conclusions. It may be that really absolutely nothing is going on, and when you actually realize that nothing is going on, you might actually be quite happy, because over the course of the day there just may be a continued sense of relief, because that can be a feature of the moon being void, of course, just relief. You thought something was serious. In fact, it's not serious at all. You can relax, and you might feel that you've escaped from something, and that's probably a good place for Scorpios to be. This sense that you're in control, that you don't have to worry about anything, and that maybe to an extent you can relax. Though do make some effort to listen to people. Now, you don't want to listen too hard to people. You certainly don't want to jump to conclusions because of what they say. But Mercury is making a conjunction to Venus today, and Venus is semi-square Uranus, so there are people who do want your attention. You should give them a little bit of your attention. And also, there are clever, talented people who want your attention. And, you might think you've got all the answers, but you haven't. And it may be that if you listen to what another person says and you try to understand their unique view, then you might be able to benefit from them. And this especially applies if you're in a relationship with anyone. So relationships could be useful because partners have a lot to offer, and partners may want to talk about something, and they may want to share their insights, and they might even want to give their advice. And if you do get advice today, then I would advise you to listen to that advice carefully. It doesn't mean you have to accept the advice, but Scorpio, you have a lot of the answers, but you don't have all the answers. Sagittarius. Sagittarius, the moon is continuing its movement through Leo, and with the moon moving through Leo, you feel a sense of optimism. You feel that things are working quite well, things are coming together, and you're aware of possibilities. And it's always nice to think about possibilities, but the moon is not really making any aspects in late Leo, which is where it is. Okay, it's making a square to Uranus, but I don't think that square to Uranus is necessarily going to come to much. So there might be some inspirations there with that moon square Uranus, but it's easy to get excited about nothing. It's easy to make things more significant than they already are. So what I'm kind of saying is that the big insights might have already happened. Well, unless you're in Australia or New Zealand. If you're in Australia or New Zealand, then this morning the moon is making a sextile to Jupiter. So there might be something really going on this morning in Australasia. If you're prepared to take advantage of it, you're going to have to be up early and see what's available. Someone might have something to offer with that moon sextile Jupiter. But if you're not in Australia or New Zealand, that moon sextile Jupiter is not going to have any impact on you, I don't think. And it's just a day for being forward thinking, but don't expect anything to come of it. And maybe instead you can look back over the last couple of days and consider what insights you've had, what opportunities have made themselves felt, and you can start to sort of get some perspective on it. Though we also have a conjunction between the Sun and Saturn. Now, this Sun-Saturn conjunction, okay, it may be exact tomorrow, but I think, Sagittarius, you may be starting to feel this, and it may be a good thing that the moon is void of course, because maybe you don't want too much excitement. And the sun conjunct Saturn is a bit of a lead weight, at least for you. And just because something is a lead weight doesn't mean it's a problem. It's trying to root things. It's trying to create a sense of foundation. And this is something I've been talking about when discussing Sagittarius for some time. Last few weeks I've been talking about it on and off, the importance of having some kind of grounding. You can worry about what is happening around you, but what matters is you. And there may be certain things at the moment relating to your home and your family with this Sun conjunct Saturn, which you're taking quite seriously. You know it's important, and you know where your priority is. And you can have insights and inspirations about the universe and so forth, but at some stage you've got to bring it all down to earth, and maybe that's something you need to do. Now, this Sun conjunct Saturn it's exact tomorrow, and I will be talking about it again tomorrow. And of course, by tomorrow, the moon will be in Virgo and will be in the sort of final run-up to a full moon. And that will certainly colour my interpretation for Wednesday. Capricorn. Capricorn, the Sun-Saturn conjunction is very much with you at the moment. The Sun-Saturn conjunction is exact tomorrow, but it's as good as exact at the moment. So you are feeling it, and some Capricorns may feel a little bit combusted. I mean, that's what we mean by the Sun-Saturn conjunction. When the Sun is conjunct Saturn, Saturn is combust. I don't think that Saturn is damaged by combustion in the same way that Mercury is. When Mercury is combust, it's almost like Saturn can look after itself to an extent. But with the Sun making a conjunction to Saturn, if there is any sense of combustion, any sense of starting to be overwhelmed, it may actually come about through the power of your own feelings. Your feelings are strong at the moment, with the moon moving through Leo. And, at times they could be overwhelming. And it may be, Capricorn, that there are certain things that you're taking a little too seriously. It's nice to be serious. And it's better to be too serious than to be not serious enough. So that's good, but you can exaggerate. And if you are too serious and you regard everything as being a potential disaster, you see the scope for things to go wrong, then you might actually be limiting yourself. And Capricorn, that's not something you want to do. Especially today, today we've got a conjunction between Venus and Mercury. Venus and Mercury is a very pleasant aspect, and this Venus-Mercury conjunction is in Aries. It's in a cardinal sign, and sort of Capricorn is a cardinal sign, Aries is a cardinal sign, so it is fundamental to you. And with this Mercury conjunct Venus, your mind could go in different ways. I've just suggested that maybe you could just be focusing on what could go wrong and all the problems that might occur. That's one way your mind could go. But with Mercury conjunct Venus, you have the possibility here of being quite, I won't say inspired, but certainly educated. There's a slight difference. I suppose with inspiration there's a sense of wonder, but with education you learn something, and you can learn something, and you can learn a lot of things today. And maybe this can all happen in your own home, and you can perhaps learn things from your own family. So there's a process of gathering information, and the information you gather can certainly be useful, and you can start to have new ideas about how things could be done, and that might relate to your ambitions, to your work, to your career, to business, and the way in which you want to move forward in your life. And this Mercury conjunct Venus may remind you that everything starts at home. That's where you feel most secure, and you don't have to be worrying about what's happening 1,000 miles away, or in your workplace, or somewhere at a distance from yourself, because the action is right with you, and you get ideas. You can do a lot of planning today. So if you want to do some planning and organizing and getting yourself together and working out what you want to do, then that's something you can do. But it's just important that you are not excessively negative. We don't want that Sun-Saturn conjunction to completely overwhelm you. You instead want to be able to work with what actually is possible, and also to get an understanding of changes in society which could impact you in a positive way, because having a sensible approach and a realistic approach, these are two great attributes of being a Capricorn, but also knowing what can happen, not just in a negative sense, but also in a positive sense as well. And it may be, Capricorn, that you're starting to realize that whatever happens, there is a way to take advantage of it. However the world changes, it's a change that can work in your favour. It can appear to work against you if you take a negative view, but there's no need to take a negative view. So if you always ask yourself, how can you take advantage of it? How can you take advantage of this change? Then you'll come up with answers. And today, your mind is on good form, and you can gather a lot of information, and you can create some really good plans. Aquarius. Aquarius, the moon continues to move through Leo, your opposite sign, and so to an extent, that might indicate that relationships are of some relevance, or at least more relevant than usual, and there may be certain people you have to take into account. But the moon is moving towards the end of Leo. It's made its last major aspect to a traditional planet, and so we can say that the moon is void of course. So it could be that certain people who were quite important a couple of days ago were having a larger impact on your life. They're sort of fading into the distance a little bit. You can maybe act in a way that is more independent today. You don't have to worry so much about what other people are doing. The moon does make a square to Uranus, though. So moon in Leo square Uranus in Taurus. And so Aquarius, that aspect might make you think that someone needs your attention. But you have to ask a few questions, and it may be that it's just actually nothing to worry about. Just because someone makes a lot of noise and is distracting, it doesn't mean that you should interrupt what you're doing. You should just listen, but you don't have to make a major detour here, because I think once you understand the facts of a matter, you'll realize that it's probably nothing worth bothering with. And also today we have a conjunction between Mercury and Venus, and this Mercury-Venus conjunction is pretty fortunate, even though Venus is retrograde and Venus is in Aries, the sign of its detriment. But despite that, I think that this Venus-Mercury conjunction allows you to give a very good account of yourself. You know how to say what's on your mind. If there's something you want, you can come up with good reasons why you should be given it. And in general, your conversation skills are going to be excellent. And I think there are going to be few subjects that you're not able to discuss. So you can talk about pretty much anything. But don't get caught up in the conversational subject material. There may be times when you're talking about stuff that you don't feel 100% familiar with it, and it's tempting to just go on, but you need to know when to stop. There are things you know a lot about, there are things you know not so much about, and it's easy to get confused at the moment. But I don't want to exaggerate the problem. I think that provided you're not making decisions today, that shouldn't really be an issue. And instead, it might be better to just relax and look at what's happening around you. Just consider it all, and be on the lookout for broad opportunities. Not just any opportunity, but broader opportunities that relate to wider trends. It's always a good idea to know how things are trending. And sometimes you can be quite good at spotting trends. Other times they can sort of catch you unawares. But now's a time when you can look at a trend which may be quite neutral. may even be apparently a bad trend, something that can supposedly make people's lives more difficult. But you can look at a trend and actually start to use it. You can start to incorporate it in terms of your life and take advantage of it. I mean, anything bad that is happening in the world, you can take advantage of it. There's always a way, and that doesn't mean to say you have to be selfish, but you do have to survive and prosper. So look at what is happening and look at where people are in difficulty, or even where people are about to be in difficulty, and you can actually see things in a very positive way. And it might also be the case that if other people are worried about where everything is progressing, then you can actually give them a sense of perspective. You can explain that actually things aren't so bad. Now, one aspect that I do need to briefly talk about is the conjunction between the Sun and Saturn. And this Sun-Saturn conjunction is exact today. Sorry, it's exact tomorrow. But it's now really close. The Sun and Saturn are within sort of less than a degree to one another. And as I think I said yesterday, that Sun-Saturn conjunction could be about relationships. And you need to be very aware about how you are relating to the important people in your life. And it could be that this Sun-Saturn conjunction is simply about two people getting closer to one another. And it may be as simple as that. But the Sun and Saturn, in their own ways, can be quite difficult energies. Saturn can overwhelm the Sun, can close the Sun down. At the same time, the Sun can burn Saturn up. And so if you are in any close relationship with anyone, really look at the chemistry between you and this other person and ask yourself whether that chemistry is healthy, and consider the possibility that you might be undermining this other person and that they might be undermining you. And that might be something that needs to be negotiated. Or in certain cases with the Sun conjunct Saturn, I've said it's about a relationship getting closer. It might be that a relationship that is an important part of your life should be put to one side just for the next couple of days while that Sun-Saturn conjunction is exact. Because if things are starting to become difficult between you and another person, very recently, and it may not be a romantic partner, it might be just another person who there have been problems with, it may be that rather than take things to a crisis point, it may be you should just stand back and for the next couple of days stay away from this person and then get back in touch once this Sun-Saturn conjunction is no longer exact. Pisces, you don't have to feel that there are loads of things that you have to do. If you've been able to do it yesterday in the past, then that's fine, you've done it. Don't feel that you have to push things any further. Chances are you've either done it or you haven't done it, and if you haven't done it, well, maybe you missed your chance, or maybe it's just unnecessary, maybe you're just worrying about nothing. So perhaps you should just try to be a little relaxed here and not feel any sense of obligation and not allow obligation to be pushed upon you. And that could happen. Something might happen and you think, this is serious, not properly prepared, you need to go out of your way to deal with the situation, but don't allow yourself to be fooled. What seems to be serious, what seems to be of pressing urgency, may actually be nothing, just absolutely nothing worth bothering with. And instead, Pisces, maybe you should just calm down, relax, not take anything too seriously, not take other people too seriously. I mean, other people are there for you, but there's no need for too much emotion today. And there's no need to feel any great sense of commitment. And if you can keep a little bit of a distance from the important people in your life and be ever so slightly detached without being cold, if you can do that, then that's probably the best way of dealing with whatever is happening today. And we have a conjunction between Mercury and Venus. Now, this conjunction between Mercury and Venus, it has been around for some time. Mercury is about to go retrograde. Venus is retrograde. And while there's nothing you have to do, it may be that you can actually take advantage of this Mercury conjunct Venus. It does allow you to communicate pretty well. You can communicate pretty well about things that are important to you. For example, money. So if you want to talk about money, now might be a good chance to do it. It's not that you're going to necessarily conclude the matter. I don't think it's that kind of day. But you can move things along, and a financial issue can perhaps be brought out into the open. You can discuss it, and you can make it clear to other people that it is important to you. And then at a later stage, there may be a chance of concluding things in a way that works in your favor. Now, if you're in Australia or New Zealand and sort of East Asia, Vladivostok, the day might be slightly different for you. And that is because the moon is earlier in the sign, and the moon is making a sextile to Jupiter this morning, not late in the day. So if you are a Pisces in Australia or New Zealand, maybe you should focus your activities on the beginning of the day when the moon is still applying to that sextile of Jupiter. And it may be that you can reach a conclusion to a matter, and perhaps quite a fortunate conclusion. It might relate to money, it might relate to something else, it might be about taking advantage of a piece of luck or just getting something together. So do focus on this morning if you are in Australia or New Zealand. If you're not in Australia or New Zealand, then that moon sextile Jupiter is probably more about yesterday, and I think you've kind of missed that. And one final thing, just a reminder, Pisces, that Sun is starting to make a conjunction to Saturn, and this conjunction to Saturn is exact tomorrow, but it's pretty much exact today. And with that Sun conjunct Saturn, there is a fundamental seriousness to that aspect, and that's something that you can present. You're not someone to be taken lightly, and if you want to make it clear to people that you are present and that you want their attention, then with that Sun-Saturn conjunction, I think that is something that you really can do. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs, and I now want to look at today from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So I ask the question, what is Tuesday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got, indeed the only hexagram I got, was hexagram number 18, which is illness. Now don't panic, I will qualify this. So we have no moving lines here. And that is perhaps appropriate because the moon is void of course today. Okay, it's not void of course this morning if you're in Australia and New Zealand, but the moon will go void of course by lunchtime, certainly by lunchtime at the latest in Australia and New Zealand. So So really, it is a void of course day. So void of course means nothing much is going on. And so with illness, no moving lines. So it just may describe today. Don't expect much to happen. It's not a day of real drama. I know that the moon makes a square to Uranus, but I think that that drama is going to be somewhat fake if it's there, so we mustn't overreact. Now, as far as what this hexagram means, I know it sounds bad in terms of illness. So illness is how Greg Winkup, in his translation of the I Ching, how he describes it. In the Wilhelm translation, which people are more familiar with, it's called work on what has been spoilt. I mean, that's quite a mouthful, work on what has been spoilt, with decay in parentheses. So what we have is a situation where things are not in good shape and they are perhaps sick. But the I Ching makes it absolutely clear that this is a sickness and an illness, or an illness that is curable. I mean, that's pretty clear. This is not anything terminal here. And so, we can work on what has been spoilt. We can work on what is rotten. In another way of looking at this hexagram, it's like a can of worms. It's like decay. Something is rotten. And it may not be our fault that it's rotten. It may be rotten because of past neglect. So we might be dealing with something that we have to work on. It's not ideal, but it's a mess. And today is a day for seeing what we need to do. We just need to cut out the rotten bits and restore it to its previous glories. And somehow, if it's not our fault, it talks about, the I Ching talks about, what the sins of the fathers, almost what the fathers did, how they messed it up, or could be, and it depends on the moving lines. There aren't any moving lines here. So past neglect can now be dealt with, and so that is something that we can do, and we're not going to accomplish a huge amount here because the lines do not move. So there is a certain sense of stagnation here, and we know what the problem is, but the question is really, can we actually deal with it? And as far as getting some more perspective on this issue, then we might want to look at the nuclear hexagram. And the nuclear hexagram for illness, remember, this is not the hexagram itself, but it's the underlying issue, is hexagram 54, which is the marrying maiden. And the marrying maiden is symbolic of a girl who is in a hurry to get married. She's in an indecent hurry to get married. And it just may be that in the past, someone was in a hurry to do something. They wanted to get it sorted out quickly. And maybe they took shortcuts. Maybe they did something that was inappropriate. I mean, maybe it's something very simple, like a repair job. So illness could be a broken household appliance. And if you look at the marrying maiden, then a broken household appliance, and the reason it's got a problem is because someone didn't fix it properly. I mean, that's one way of looking at it. But it may not be anything physical. It just may be something that is not in good shape, and something that has been neglected, and we now have to start working on getting it right. And we can't expect a solution today. We can identify the problem, because remember, there are no moving lines, and it just may be about awareness. And that once we've got awareness, then tomorrow, or perhaps later, we can start to really work out what needs to be done. But if you are faced with something that is not working, is in a state of decay, then at least it's a beginning. It's the beginning of starting to resolve the problem. And now I want to look to what's going on in Canada. And the Liberal Party has chosen Mark Carney as its new leader, and he is about to be sworn in as Prime Minister. And we don't know when, at least I don't know when, sometime over the next couple of days. And it's not going to be, I presume it's not going to be, well, I'm making this recording on Monday, so it may be, for all I know, maybe by the time you watch it, he's already sworn in. But the impression is just early in the week. Is that today? Could it be Wednesday? I don't know. So Mark Carney was a central banker. He's been governor of the Bank of Canada. He's been governor of the Bank of England. Before that, he worked for Goldman Sachs. He's connected with the World Economic Forum. He's attended meetings of the Bilderberg Group. So we know what kind of person we're dealing with here. And so here is his chart. I don't have a time of birth for him. And so I've been thinking, by the way, when you're dealing with Mark Carney, and it seems to be that a certain type of person is just becoming leader in, whether it's Britain, in terms of Britain, France, Germany. It's this sort of globalist person. I mean, he's got lots of different passports. I think he's obviously got a Canadian passport. He's got an American passport, I think, and he's got a UK passport. So, he's a man of the world. He's got 3 different passports. He can go to different places, and this sort of globalism is it is such a big theme. And I was thinking back to the United States election, and I'm, very, very sad at the impact that Donald Trump is having on the environment. I know that you disagree. Some people disagree with me here, but on the other hand, what would have happened if Harris had won? I mean, in a way, if Harris had won, it would have made this sort of globalist view of the world would have been complete. And so you could say that there is a saving grace to Trump winning, and that saving grace is that it kind of saved the Western world from something. It provided a counter when you've got people like Carney and Starmer and Macron in control, and you look at what's happening in Germany. So it was a major break on globalism. Trump winning that election. Anyway, I'm rambling. The point is, we need to talk about Carney, and with Carney, I don't have a time of birth for him. Hopefully that time of birth will eventually emerge. So here's his chart. Born March the 16th, 1965, just a few days before his 60th birthday. And he was born in Fort Smith, Canada. And that means that he is a Pisces. And it's always difficult to know how to deal with Pisceans, because you get an image of a Pisces who is sort of otherworldly, chaotic, very very motivated in terms of some particular agenda. I mean, Osama bin Laden was a Pisces, and so was Kazemi, that man who they were born on the same day. He was the head of the Revolutionary Guards, and Trump killed him in Baghdad, and so they were Pisceans. And so the question is, how is that Pisces working? And I think that is a very important question. Now, just because you're a Pisces doesn't mean that you can't be a business success. I mean, Rupert Murdoch is a Pisces. I know that there are issues about what's happening with his empire now, but certainly at his peak, Rupert Murdoch was a brilliant businessman. He was quite brutal. I remember the early 80s when he was tearing apart Fleet Street in London and bringing in new technology and people being made redundant in the newspaper industry. So he was quite tough-minded, Rupert Murdoch, but he was certainly very successful. So you can be a Pisces and be a successful business person. Clearly, he is successful in terms of his meteoric rise through the ranks. Goldman Sachs, governor of a Bank of Canada, governor of Bank of England, and now he is about to be Canadian Prime Minister. Again, we still don't know when he's going to be Canadian Prime Minister. And there are a few interesting things about his chart, aside from the fact that he's a Pisces. He's got no air in his chart. Now, when you have someone who's got no air in their chart, that does not mean to say that they are unintelligent. I mean, he went to Harvard and Oxford. Clearly, Mark Carney is an extremely intelligent person, whatever you think of him. But if you've got no air in his chart, there can be a certain amount of inflexibility and arrogance. He believes he's got the answers. He doesn't really have to explain it. He's very certain of himself. He's got his own views, he's got his own ideology, and he's already worked it out, and he doesn't really have to think about anything else. And so that can be how a lack of air in someone's chart actually works. So it's not necessarily something to welcome, having a lack of air in your chart. So if you look at the chart of Emmanuel Macron, for example. So here's Emmanuel Macron's chart. Macron has Pluto in Libra, but he doesn't have any personal traditional planets in air signs. And again, Emmanuel Macron, like Mark Carney, extremely intelligent man, no doubt about that, whatever you think of him, but he believes he's right. And in the same way, I think that Mark Carney believes he's right. He believes he's got all the answers. And when you throw in the fact that he's got Pisces in his chart, when he's a sun in Pisces, then it's almost like he is immersed in an ideology. And that ideology he has developed through his time at Goldman Sachs, at governor of a Bank of Canada, governor of a Bank of England. So he believes that, I would guess, some kind of globalist ideology, particularly when you think in terms of his connection with the World Economic Forum, his attendance at the Bilderberg Group, have I pronounced that right? And by the way, if you're in the UK, you might be interested to know that he in 2023, he endorsed Rachel Reeves as Chancellor when she was Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer. So he regards Rachel Reeves, the British Chancellor of the Exchequer, who was turning out to be a real disaster. He thought she'd make a good Chancellor of the Exchequer. So I do think with this Sun in Pisces, a lack of air, we are talking about an ideologue, someone who has immersed himself in a particular ideology, and he believes he believes he's right. And it's kind of fitting, isn't it, that the Liberal Party in Canada have chosen someone who is not a member of the House of Commons, who has not been elected by the Canadian people. He's only been elected by the Liberal Party. And there is a sense of, is it entitlement? But he has the knowledge. He does fit the globalist ideology. So those Those are some main features in his chart. Now, he was born in the mid-60s, so he was born, when you had this sort of opposition, Pisces, Virgo opposition, and he has a Venus-Mars opposition in his chart. So Venus-Mars opposition, that may say something about his charisma. So he can be quite charismatic. He can come over as an attractive person to some people. I mean, that is an issue. That's the issue of Venus-Mars. Venus-Mars can be attractive. It can be repulsive. And so in Canada, there are obviously some people who think he's wonderful. I mean, that's why he got 80-something percent of the vote when the Liberal Party voted for him to be their leader. But a lot of people are not going to find that so impressive. And he has a Moon-Mars... well, we don't know exactly how conjunct that Moon-Mars is because we don't know what time he's born. But he's got Moon possibly conjunct Mars, and he's also got Mars conjunct Pluto. So he's got Mars conjunct Pluto. So that really is about power and the acquisition of power. And this is what he has done. And so you've got that against those Pisces planets, and so he wants to be in control. Mars in Pluto in Virgo, Moon in Virgo. He wants to be able to understand things and to have the details right in front of him. That's how Mars in Virgo works. Mars in Virgo can put a lot of energy into sorting out those details. Yet then he's got the Sun, Venus in Pisces, the chaos of Pisces. Now, maybe as a central banker, he's got a certain ability to bring those two together. The chaos of the economy, always having to deal with new things going on. I mean, you need to have a certain fluidity if you want to be a central banker. And so far, you could say, but maybe he's managed it quite well. And he's certainly been able to get elected as Canada's Prime Minister. Again, not elected by the Canadian people, but instead elected by the Liberal Party. And looking at a few of his midpoints, his sun is on the Mercury-Saturn midpoint. So you can see there's his sun on a Mercury-Saturn midpoint. So sun on a Mercury-Saturn midpoint, that does give him a certain amount of toughness and maybe being able to make hard decisions. That could be Sun conjunct Mercury-Saturn. At the same time, he may be vulnerable to changes in the news cycle. There could be a negativeness that can occasionally sort of creep in. Yes, he's hardworking, but he may reach a certain point where he could at times regard things as being hopeless with that sun on the Mercury-Saturn midpoint. I mean, let me just tell you what, because it is quite an important midpoint, I'll give you a different perspective, see what Vita says about Sun on the Mercury-Saturn midpoint. So Sun on the Mercury-Saturn midpoint, parting person, unruly guest, not staying long in one place, to roam. In a way, that says so much about it, doesn't it? Because Mercury-Saturn can be about saying farewells. And so he's got 3 passports. He moves from country to country. He goes to, he roams, certainly. He does his bachelor's degree at Harvard, then he goes to Oxford to do his postgraduate work, and then he moves, governor of the Bank of Canada, governor of the Bank of England. Now he's deciding to move to be Prime Minister of Canada. This could be this Sun conjunct Mercury-Saturn. There is something quite globalist about it, because he doesn't have any attachments here. Remember, Mercury-Saturn is about saying goodbye. He's got a commitment here, but then the commitment ends and he moves somewhere else to spread his ideology. It's almost like some Catholic priest, or friar, they get their orders. You are going to go to this church and you're going to stay this church. You stay in 10 years, stay there for 10 years, you spread your ideology, then you're ordered somewhere else. I mean, that might be how we interpret Sun on the Mercury-Saturn midpoint. Giving you what Reinhold Ebertin says about Sun on the Mercury-Saturn midpoint. He says Sun on the Mercury-Saturn midpoint, a person with a retarded mental development. I don't think we can say that, but a love of travelling, changes, separations, repeated changes of residence. This is really fitting really very well. And so, given all that, okay, he's Prime Minister of Canada. He's about to be Prime Minister of Canada. Is he going to last a year? There's got to be elections soon. How long is that going to last? Where is his next residence? That's what you've got to think with Carney. Where's he going to move to next? What does he want to be? Does he want to, I don't know, where would he like to be? Would he like to be head of NATO, maybe? Maybe he could, I don't know, he could join the British government. Why not? He's got a British passport. He doesn't have to be elected. He can go into the House of Lords. Whatever. He can do what he likes. So that gives us an idea about him. And as far as his future, his immediate future is concerned, well, he's got a birthday coming up. He's going to be 60 on the 16th. So he's going to be 60. When is the 16th? He's going to be 60 on Sunday. Sunday is his 60th birthday. That's a nice birthday present, him becoming Prime Minister of Canada. And here is his solar return. Now, the solar return is of limited value because I don't have a time of birth. But if you set up his solar return, the thing to notice is that obviously Sun-Saturn, there's a Sun-Saturn conjunction in his solar return. Sure, there's a Sun-Saturn conjunction in everyone's solar return at the moment. But this is a reminder that he has got his Sun at 25 degrees 59 Pisces, and Saturn is starting to make a conjunction to his Sun. So as he becomes Prime Minister, Saturn's on his Sun. And you might say, well, that's actually okay, because it is about responsibility. Very often people hit high political office when they've got that aspect. That's true. But it's not going away, because the Sun makes the aspect to the Sun. Okay, Saturn makes the aspect to the Sun. Okay, in fact, it will be exact. He will have his Saturn conjunct Sun. Again, I don't have his time of birth, so this is slightly approximate, but it will be Sun 2559. So that will be at around the middle of April. He'll have Saturn crossing his Sun, and then Saturn will go forward. It will go through late Pisces and it will go into Aries. And so we've got that, and then Saturn will eventually go retrograde. And so Saturn's going to cross his Sun again, and that will happen. That will happen in the autumn, I think. So Saturn 2559. Yeah, Saturn goes direct at the end of November, 25/9 Pisces. So at the end of the year, he gets that again. And I'm thinking that probably means when he loses the election. Isn't that right? I mean, I don't know much about Canadian politics, and I haven't really done a horary. I haven't done any real forecasts about whether or not he'll win, but I'm guessing that crossing of his Saturn will be when, sorry, that crossing of his Sun will be when he loses the election. And so remember that his Sun on his Sun is, his Sun, we have to look at the state of his Sun, and as I've said, his Sun is on his Mercury-Saturn midpoint. So as Saturn crosses his Sun, he moves from place to place. So it may be that as he loses the election, at the end of a year, he starts to consider his next job, because it's all about travelling. Said maybe he's going to go to England, go to the UK. Maybe he can, I don't know, he can go to the UK. He can become a member of a cabinet. You join the House of Lords. He could be Chancellor of the Exchequer. He could take over from Rachel Reeves. I mean, why not? He endorsed her in 2023. So I think it's kind of a bit obvious the way Mark Carney is going to be working out, I think. And also, where are his challenges going to lie? Ukraine has caused people a lot of trouble, hasn't it, recently? When politicians have to deal with Ukraine, how long do they last? How long do they last for? And so I was just also wondering, what is the connection between Mark Carney and Ukraine, just for fun? What does Ukraine do to him? So I'm going to put Mark Carney on the inner wheel, Ukraine on the outer wheel. And Ukraine when Ukraine declared its independence on August the 24th, 1991, Mars was at 2505 Virgo. So Ukraine's Mars is opposition Carney's Sun. So what we've got is, over the next couple of months, Saturn will be opposition Ukraine's Mars. Mars could represent the armed forces, the Ukrainian military, and it might just be that things are going to just get increasingly difficult for Ukraine. I mean, that's what we expect anyway. So Saturn is going to be opposition Ukraine's Mars at the same time as Saturn is conjunct Carney's Sun. And so this may be about him as Prime Minister having to deal with the Ukraine fallout, because the Canadian government has been really committed to Ukraine. Though, if I were to advise Carney, I would have said he needs to distance himself from Ukraine. Ukraine is going to be a problem for him. And maybe privately he will realize that Ukraine is a problem. Maybe he'll be realistic about it. Maybe. But I do think we mustn't forget that Carney is a globalist ideologue, and we can very much see this in his chart. And that's it. That's all I'm going to say about Mark Carney. I hope you found this video of some interest. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I would be super grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. And I will talk to you again tomorrow.